My name is Megan Smolenyak, and I'm a professional genealogist. I've been at it for quite a while, basically since I was about 10 years of age. And I thought today that I would share a few thoughts about how to identify an enslaver. I know that's not the most pleasant of topics, but it is, unfortunately, for obvious reasons, a rather critical one. And so I thought I would just share a variety of sources that you could use for this purpose. Now, I think most people, when they take their baby steps in this field, the first thing they think of is property records, particularly deeds and estate records, especially wills and inventories. And this is an excellent place to go. The trick is, though, it can be a bit of a catch-22 situation if you don't know who the enslaver was. So I wanted to share some other resources for trying to identify that person if you're not fortunate enough to be able to just dive into your local county records and get some sort of easy lead into that. So one possibility, of course, very well known, are the Freedmen Bank and Freedmen Bureau records for that matter as well. But the Freedmen Bank's records are incredible because older listeners will remember a time when you used to have to give a lot of personal information to open a bank account. Well, with the Freedmen's Bank, that was very much the case. And sometimes you can get a ton of information about your ancestor, yes, including the enslaver, but lots of other good details, like maybe their parents' names or names of siblings or which states they may have been moved to, that kind of thing. So that's a possibility you can try. If you were fortunate enough to have ancestors who served in the Civil War, you can check for Civil War pension files. That data is often in there. And I've even found over the years, a number of times I've managed to find it for the widow of the serviceman, that for whatever reasons and all the paperwork that they generate, they mention the enslaver of both the husband and the wife. Another possibility, it's lesser known, is Confederate Citizen Files. And this is when Confederates basically were making a claim for compensation for those they had enslaved who managed to get away before emancipation. And they would try to get reimbursed for it. So you can get information there. And they often give a lot of details, names and ages, a little bit about the kind of work they did, that sort of thing. A little bit similar to this is the Southern Claims Commission, which wasn't started until 1871, and this was for Union supporters. But oftentimes you'll find formerly enslaved individuals as witnesses in those records, and so they're always worth a check. There are a lot of hyper-local records, so that are really tremendous if you don't have luck with those sort of general ones that I've been speaking about. For example, if you had ancestors who were in the Washington, D.C. area, emancipation occurred there a little bit earlier. So you can check their emancipation records, 1862, 1863. It's another compensation situation where the enslaver is trying to get compensation for their losses, which is aggravating, yes, but it's good information. So that's worth trying. I use that, for example, for Philip Reed, who was the individual who was responsible for putting the Statue of Freedom on the top of the U.S. Capitol dome. Another great resource I tripped across just last year when I was doing Val Deming's roots is that the Union, believe it or not, in 1864, did a census of just of Northeast Florida. And darned if her ancestors, or one in particular, wasn't in that record. And it gave me just the information I needed to pick up the trail and go further and learn about twins she had that I hadn't known about from other resources, all sorts of good things. There's also, of course, a good old-fashioned courthouse crawl. When I was doing Michelle Obama's roots, I went to local county courthouses. Fully a quarter of her ancestry comes from Southern Virginia. And so I planted myself at a few courthouses there. And there was one in particular where I went through literally every single book on the shelf. I had done, all the usual lookups, but I noticed there were some books with no labeling on them. And I went through every single one of them page by page. And one of them had a former enslaver who, it was a female, who, for whatever reasons, recorded the births of those she had enslaved back in the 1840s and 1850s. And so this was a tremendous amount of information. Of course, helped put together mother and child for a number of people. Another one, this is kind of a strange one. When I did Pharrell Williams' roots, I used the American Colonization Society records. This was that organization that tried to send people to Liberia. And it was mostly focused on what was the term used then was free people of color. But sometimes the enslaver, for example, in his own family, there was an example of an enslaver who was a minister. And for religious purposes, he realized what he was doing was wrong. And so he liberated those he had enslaved to send them to Liberia. And so I got a lot of details that way. And then, of course, more and more, there's all sorts of great resources online. So the Library of Virginia, for example, has its Virginia Untold records, or there's another source, for example, called Freedom on the Move, which features all sorts of runaway ads. So there's a whole host of resources out there. You want to start with the, sort of the main bricks, which are those property records that I mentioned at the very beginning. But please know that there's so much more out there that you can explore. So I wish you the best of luck with your quest. And if you'd like to learn more, just check out my website. It's megansmolenyak.com. Megan is the short version, MEGAN. Last name is SMOLENYAK. Thanks.